The Gascoigne Estate was, it was interesting. We had a whole mixed bag of people. We had literally I think there was 2 mixed race families, that was us and another family. And predominantly we had white, we had black, it was a whole mixture, whole mixed bag of people, Asian, very multicultural area. We had a mixture. Are you running?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know if this was just a test run.
No.
Okay, sorry, I'll carry on then. The funny thing is, as a kid, we didn't quite fit in. We weren't black and we weren't white. And on the Gascoigne Estate, we had black and white, Asian, everything else. So we was always, me and my brothers and sisters were always trying to find, where do we quite fit in? But the funny thing is, it was one big community where everyone just kind of got on. There was people you loved, people you hated. We had some of the elderly, they'd be sending us to run to the shops and get this and get that and go and get me 10 fags and stuff like that. In them days, like, kids could get cigarettes for the grown-ups at shops and beers and alcohol. But there was a sense of community in the sense that you could be told off. You could even get a clip round the ear roll. And if your mum found out, she'd give you another one the other side. She wouldn't go fighting the neighbours like they do these days. She'd say, "You upset old Lil, did you? You're in trouble with me now," and you'd get a double whammy. So there was a kind of sense of respect. You would listen to your friends' parents when they shouted at you and stopped you playing around and jumping on the bike sheds, because I was always playing run-outs and messing around. So by the time I reached my teens, there was a lot of National Front trying to recruit kids. It was Thatcher's Britain. People were depressed. People were upset. Even though we still had this community thing, we still all hung out together. We would get a lot of National Front kids as well, because they sort of started to follow some of their parents. But the weird thing was, they'd be messing around and there'd be the same racist stuff. But then they'd say, "Yo, you're coming down the hall or coming over the park." So you still hung out. So it was really weird. I think they didn't quite understand what they were doing. They were following their parents, but you were still their best mate. So you still hung out, you still went over the park, you still kicked a ball around and was generally a nuisance. So I think, and then there was a punk attitude as well, and punk music was sort of big just before the two-tone era. So we all became punks. We were rebelling against the system, but we were rebelling together. So you might have a Jamaican sound boy and in his little flat on the ground floor of Gascoyne House, there'd be music booming away all day and we'd all be hanging out there, but the same way there'd be a mod and a skinhead mate, and they might have National Front stickers on them, and the mod's there, loving his old Kinks music and stuff that was sort of having a revival, and we were kind of in the middle of that. So but we still hung out and enjoyed it all together. We'd fall out, we'd get back together, we'd fall out, but it was like common ground. It was always, let's go and hang out in the flats. You didn't have to go anywhere. That was your somewhere to be. It was that kind of thing.
Fantastic. And what was the estate like? We're talking about the 80s here, are we?
Yes, this is sort of late 70s going into the 80s, just as Thatcher's Britain took hold.
Yeah. And what was it like physically, the estate?
The estate physically, it was actually quite run down. There was a lot of graffiti everywhere, some of it that we did ourselves. So there was a lot of graffiti. There was old bike sheds getting ready to be knocked down. I mean, they hadn't been, no locks on them. We used to hang out in them, hide in them, sit in them when it was raining. There was sort of flower gardens. I call them flower gardens, but there was just run down bushes in the middle of the estates. There was no lifts anywhere, so if you had a mate on the 4th floor, it was always like just shouting up. You couldn't be bothered to go all the way up the stairs. "You're coming out, we're going over the park." So yeah, it was quite run down, and you had people that had money and you had those that didn't. So you had the kids that their parents could afford a new bike, a new grifter, a new chopper, and there was us who we'd go over the dump just by Victoria Park and find bits and pieces of bikes and make our own. That's what we do. And then wrap it around with loads of masking tape to make it look pretty, because it might have been rusty old bucket, you know. So I would say it was quite run down. It was cold. We were just coming out of the era of coal fires in our actual flats, going into the era of having a gas fire and things like that, and central heating. We hadn't had central heating up until that point. So we had old electric fires in the bedroom, in one bedroom. Only one bedroom had them, the others had nothing. And then you had the coal fire. But then, of course, the council came and said, right, we're going to modernise all your homes. So they gave us new kitchens, new toilets and bathrooms, and put central heating in. It was like luxury, like, wow, you know, it's warm now. So all that time being cold with hot water bottles was no more. So it was kind of strange for us. We felt, you know, quite special.
Great, yeah. And what about some of the friendships that you had then?
Well, I had friends. It's really strange because I had a friend from Scotland who moved into the estate just before the 80s. I had another friend who literally we grew up together from babies on Gascoyne right up to even now. We're still very good friends. And she was from Turkey. And then I had another friend who was from the Caribbean. So I had a really mixed bag of friends, you know, it's like multicultural in a bottle. And we all hung out and we all got on great. And even to this day, we're such close friends because we all had our differences. We were all very diverse, but yet we all came together because Gascoigne Estate always had a community feel. You would fight other estates just because they didn't belong on your estate. You know, when you was teenagers, what are they doing around here? They're not from Gascoyne. So you had Gascoyne 1, you had Gascoyne 2. Sometimes you'd mingle with Gascoyne 2 over the road. But mostly you were a close-knit community and you didn't need to go and knock for a friend. You would just hang out in the middle of the estate and everyone would just come to you and you'd all just suddenly come together, go walkabouts and do stuff together. And we became really close, and even the older people at that time, we had like sweet little Kit, and she's still around today, and she was amazing. She was like the grandmother of everybody. I absolutely adore Kit. I love Kit. And she would come out and say, oh no, you mustn't do that, and oh, don't upset him. And she had this way, and we always responded to her, whereas others would come out and have a right old go at us, and we think, oh, can't stand her. We had caretakers, you know, and you got to know them. They would be hanging around, keeping an eye on you, telling you off, but you knew them. You know, that's the kind of community you had. That caretaker would pop and knock at your mum's and say, you know what they've been up to today? You know, and stuff like that. It was community. We was all there, intertwined together. If someone had a party, we'd all turn up there. We'd all end up at this party. You didn't need an invite, you'd just go. You know, it was like that. Everyone knew everyone. We all did, and we all stuck together. We might fight each other, but if someone else from outside the estate was causing someone bother, we'd all be there together, ready to, you know, defend our territory, defend our friend. And it's been like that for years. If you go back there now, the people that have been there for a long time, they still remember that. You still have that sense of home around them. You know, you do.
And tell me a little bit about your background, because your parents were mixed race. Your dad was from the Caribbean,
yes,
I believe,
that's right,
and was involved with London Transport. He was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was it like being a mixed race young person?
Yeah, it was strange. I've got to be honest. At the time, you don't know it. When you're a child, you're innocent. You don't see that kind of thing. It was other people that put that on me. So when we finally went to school, because we lived in the top end of Hackney, up near Stoke Newington, and moved down to Gascoyne when I was only a toddler. So we were a bit late to get into the nearest school. Most kids went to Berger.
Yeah.
We went to Gainsborough, which was way down in Trowbridge Estate. But when we went there halfway through a year, and literally probably by the time I was about 6 or 7, I'd started to realise colour. I probably wouldn't have if it weren't for the kids at school. And you had some kids who were quite nasty, and they would say naughty things, about my mum. Oh, your mum's a nigger lover and things like that. And you'd have other kids saying, well, you're all right because you're lighter, and things like that. It was awful. It was actually quite nasty, and we got quite bullied because my dad, he came over in 1960, worked for the transport for years, on the buses and then later on the trains. But he'd always worked hard. He was always working hard all the time to provide for us. And my mum, and we lost him when I was only 6. So my mum really struggled. We didn't have much. She was quite poor. So we had to make the best of what we had. So we didn't have a lot of the luxuries other kids, would have, like I said, about bikes and stuff like that. We couldn't afford that. My mum couldn't get those things for us. So we would hang out on friends' bikes because everyone was sharing in them days. It was very good. So at school, when kids were sort of jibing and saying all these comments and calling you half-breed monkey and stuff like that, it was horrible. And I think I probably spent most of my childhood quite depressed about it because I started to feel like, well, I don't fit there and I don't fit there. I've got black friends and I've got white friends. Where do I fit? And many mixed-race people you'll find will go one way or the other. I didn't want to do that. Even in my young years, I wanted to be both. So it was kind of iconic for me when two-tone music came about, because suddenly I'd been quite punky before that and rebellious, and suddenly there was this band, the Specials, talking about let's put black and white together and unite and fight the system and fight the social issues we're all going through, because that's what their songs were about. And a lot of them were about, you can't walk the streets because you're going to get in trouble, or National Front's going to beat you up if you're black, or if you're a model rocker, you're not going to fit with a skinhead. And a lot of their music was about that kind of thing. So when they came along, I thought, wow, but I am black and white, and I'm all of those things all in one. So yeah, that's the music for me. And what made it even more important is my mum and dad had played, tunes like Prince Buster and all that early stuff, Desmond Dekker, and the Specials ended up covering some of those songs and changing them a bit and modernising them and putting a bit of punky background to the ska. So I was already familiar with a lot of the sounds, which was fantastic for me. So I already felt familiar with the music. It was just so right for me. And the attitude at the time. It was Thatcher Britain. I used to go on marches, socialist marches, with my friends, and they were a mixture of mod skinheads and sound boys and reggae kids. And we would go marching, and the music of the time was the two-tone music, that whole infused ska.
Incredible. Yeah, you put it all into context.
Yes.
Very good, very good. I'm learning. I'm learning so much. Now, you did show me a picture of a car.
Yes.
And when you were very rebellious.
Yes.
Something happened to this car.
Yeah. Well, no. I was probably about 13, and back then, as I say, you had a lot of parties and stuff going on, and people would just get drunk. This is the grown-ups. Get drunk, leave their keys lying around, and I decided to take a car for a spin. As you do. I did say I was a rebellious teen. So yeah, I took the car for a spin, but I ended up owning the car, even though I was 13. Yeah, go on, you can have the car. So I kept it. And I drove all over, and it was a Cortina Mark III. And I drove all over the place. I went from Hackney, Gascoyne, all the way to Southend in it. I went to Camden, I went all over the place with it. I even went to Hackney Wick, left the car there and took a bus for a ride, literally. Back then keys were everywhere. No one worried about leaving the keys in the ignition or hanging on the side. So I took a number 6 bus for a ride up to Welsh Street, round the back of Welsh Street Common and back down, and then I left it under a bridge down by Hackney Wick. God, I'm admitting this now. Hope I don't get arrested.
And this is a bit of training for because didn't you become a qualified tube driver?
I did, yes. Well, funny enough, I tended to follow in my dad's footsteps, and I was always tomboyish. So a lot of the jobs I did, I was a postman, I did some portering jobs, but I ended up following my dad's footsteps and going to work for London Underground. And I literally worked the ranks of London Underground. I went from being the frontline staff to supervisory and ticket office, right up into the office. I became a manager and so on. And at one point in my career there, I wanted to become a manager of the Victoria line. But to do that, you still had to have trains knowledge and background. So although I'd worked around trains, you have to be qualified. So I went through the whole duty manager trains process, rules and regulations, learned the ins and outs of a train, and you also had to be able to take that train into service, along the track, come back. So yes, you had to qualify to be a tube driver. And my mum was like, oh, I knew one of you would take after Dad, you know. So it's quite nice for me.
A lot of this goes back to the roots of growing up in Hackney, doesn't it? The music and the skills, and it's amazing how much you are formed as a young person growing up.
I think
Things
so.
happen later on in life that you
yes,
think,
I totally agree with you, and I think my mum's always called me jack of all trades, but what it actually is, again, I say I was tomboyish, but I was also one of these that I always wanted better. And I saw people with better. So, and it weren't an envious thing. I just thought, oh, okay, well, I'll paint that wall and make the room look nicer. So I've always been hands-on with DIY. We used to go over Victoria Park and they had an adventure playground. We hung out there all throughout the summer, all through the holidays and weekends. But there, they would let you get involved with things. Like you would get a hammer and nail and help them build a ramp that would lead up to a rope swing, and help them build a tree house. So a lot of things were very hands-on anyway then. There wasn't so much worry about health and safety. And strangely, I became a health and safety manager later on as well. I took myself to college because I was great at school, as in my grades. Absolutely brilliant. But I didn't stay at school. I would always mess around. And I was, as I say, I was a bit depressed. As I say, there was kids who were horrible, kids who were nice, but we still end up being friends. Didn't quite fit in, and I ended up going to 9 different schools, 9 in Hackney, which is just bizarre when I think back on it. And there was always a reason to move me around. But one of those things was I then didn't bother to do my exams, and I always regretted it. Mm-hmm. But I became a teen mum, and all the things that I didn't want to do, I became. And then one day I had 2 young babies, and I thought, I don't want this. I don't want the circle to continue. I don't want to be broke and struggling to bring my kids up. So I actually decided to take myself and spend money. So I was full-time mummy as well as part-time worker as well as part-time at college. So I paid for my education. What I could have got for free. Don't do it, people. Get it while it's free. So I spent a lot of money and went all the way up to North London Uni to get myself qualified. So I became a health and safety manager. I qualified in business and finance and company law. So I had all these things in the background, and that's how I started getting, more and more different jobs. And then I worked the ranks of the underground as well and took every training opportunity there as well. But it was always about bettering yourself, because if you don't do it, no one's going to do it for you. And as a young kid, I was very aware of all of that. And then as a teen, I was aware, and when we were fighting, and being revolutionaries, or so we thought, it suddenly dawned on me when I had 2 young children that only I can change that cycle. Only I can change that. So that's what made me think, no, let's get educated. Let's take this and do what I can with it. I've always been great at school, I think the teachers hated me for it because I could be off for months, bunking off and hanging around Gascoyne. And then there was a lot of squats then as well, and we used those as our hangouts instead of going to school. And it's terrible to think back on it now, but that's what you did. You'd hide from, you used to have truancy officers cycle around and look for you. So yeah, that's how I basically decided, no, I've got young children now, I don't want them to follow this. I want them to have something better. So I educated myself.
Well done. That's amazing. And what about your life now in music? Are you? What's the next stage for you?
Well, after being educated and doing all those things, the sideline for me and my sister in particular, we always did drama. And we joined a lot of local places doing drama workshops and stuff. Yeah. And then we went on to other places like Anna Shears.
You were at drama school for a while.
Yes, we did Anna Shears and Oxton Hall.
Yeah.
So there was always things like that going on. So we became, we did a lot of amateur dramatics, as well as singing and dancing, that kind of thing. So all along I was doing a lot of theatre. I did some TV stuff and films. And then during a period of time, there was a kind of rehash of the whole two-tone movement and the special reunion tour and everything. So around that time, I was doing some backing singing for a punk band, as well as still working for the Underground. And I met my husband, and my husband is Neville from the Specials. So he'd gone from being my pin-up as a teen, when I was doing the rebellious stuff and socialist stuff, to being my husband. So I've always had an interest in music. Music has been through the 80s, it was a lot of, as I say, the Specials and the two-tone movement. That moved into a lot of the sort of more modern stuff that was coming about at that time, electronic stuff. And then in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a lot of conscious reggae that we was all getting very much into. And the early rap as well. Although that took a different turn, it was a bit too harsh for me. But we did love the conscious reggae that was all about how you're living your life and so on. So I've always been part of music. It's grown with me all the way along. And then I started to do my own singing. And of course, being married to Neville, he realised that I wrote some songs and was just singing them just to mess around. And he said, these songs are great, put them out there. And it just so happens that those tunes are very reminiscent of the kind of the two-tone era and the conscious reggae music, as well as a bit of a 60s feel as well to some of them, blue beat and rocksteady. So he said, put them out there, I'll help you produce them, you've written them, we'll get the musicians in and go for it. So I did, and did some music videos as well, and basically everyone loved them. So I'm, funny enough, about to sign with a label now to put a full album out. I did the EP last year. That went down a treat and sold out. So I'm now doing the full album, as well as managing my husband. I've actually gone into band management now. So I'm actually managing my husband, Neville Staple, and his band, as well as running events. I run festivals, a big one called Skarmouth with a friend of mine, Tom. We run that twice a year. So music has become my life. It was my life back then, and it's my life now.